Hello, everybody. We might just have a few people still trickling in as the waiting room is taken away, but we'll get started. As a welcome to our Birds of Newfoundland session tonight, we'll be talking about ducks and loons. And I'm happy to see that we have lots of folks here again to learn. And I'm excited to tell you all about ducks and loon, because there's only one loon. For those who haven't met me before, my name is Jenna McDermott. I am the assistant coordinator for the Newfoundland Breeding Bird Atlas, and I work for Birds Canada. And also on the line, we have Catherine Dale, who is the coordinator for the Atlas. And we also have Isabel, who is our intern for the winter. So Catherine and Belle will be monitoring the chat and helping out with any issues, and feel free to write in any questions in the chat as we go along, or we'll have time for questions at the end as well.
Push it back just a little bit because I put the long distance glasses on. Okay, that's better.
So as I mentioned, I work for an organization called Birds Canada, and it's a nonprofit organization. We have offices all across Canada, and our mission is to drive action to increase the understanding, appreciation, and conservation of birds in Canada. And to do this, we offer lots of different programs across the country, and they're typically citizen science programs, which are basically volunteer-based, where people can get involved in data collection and share that information with us to help conserve birds. So each year, over 70,000 volunteers have been engaged with Birds Canada, and we're really excited to be able to have some programs in Newfoundland now. So the first program that we have in Newfoundland is the Newfoundland Breeding Bird Atlas. We will be having a webinar on the Atlas. Again, I forgot the date, but maybe someone will put it in the chat for me. And so if you want to learn more specifics about it, come on out to that webinar. It's one of this session series as well. But a quick rundown is we intend to map the distribution and abundance of all of the birds that breed on the island of Newfoundland. And so you can see up there on the top, we have an American black duck, and all of the squares on the map that you can see beside it are places where American black duck has been found during the Atlas so far. So this is a really a good program for anyone to get involved with of any skill level in bird identification, because you only need to know really one species, and you can already submit data that is really important to helping fill out the data set and conserve these birds in the future. So if, for example, you see some female duck with some ducklings this spring, that's really important information that we'd love to have in the Atlas. So would definitely consider being a volunteer with us for that. The next, or the other program that we run in Newfoundland is the Atlantic Nocturnal Owl Survey. And so the Atlas is only for the island of Newfoundland, but the Owl Survey is for Newfoundland and Labrador. And this is another citizen science program, which is really great for beginners as well as more advanced bird watchers, because there's not too many species of owls in Newfoundland. So basically, a volunteer would do or sign up for a route where you just drive a 20-kilometer roadside count one evening in the early spring, and you stop at 10 different stops and listen for the owls that you find there, and then you'd submit that data to the Owl Survey website. And it's really fun to hear those owls off in the distance, and it's a fun activity for folks. So feel free to get in touch with us if you want to be involved with the Owl Survey as well. I would like to start off tonight by acknowledging that Newfoundland is the unceded traditional territory of the Beothuk and the Mi'kmaq people, and these people have been protecting the island and Newfoundland and Labrador since time immemorial, and stewarding the lands and animals that live there. And through the work of our Breeding Bird Atlas, as well as the Owl Survey, we hope to assist that stewardship in protecting all the species that we share the land with. And Birds Canada understands that Indigenous voices knowledge and ongoing work on the land are critical for wild birds to thrive in sustainable ecosystems. We support the needs, aspirations, and rights of Indigenous peoples to care for the land. If you are living or working in a different area and you want to check out what Indigenous lands you are on, you can check out this website I have at the bottom here, nativeland.ca, and do some learning about the lands that you're on as well. And just before we get into ducks, I'd like to quickly thank all of our partners and funders who allow us to put off our programs as well as sessions like these ones. So thanks to all these folks on here. Okay, now let's get into our Newfoundland ducks and loons. So this is our list of species we'll be going through tonight. As you can see, we have quite a lot of species to go through. So hopefully we'll be able to shed some light on all of these over the next hour and a little bit. Just a note that I'll be focusing on birds that nest in Newfoundland. There are others around in the winter, especially different kinds of ducks and some other species of loons. And I won't go into those very much because otherwise our list gets really extensive. And I'll also note, though, that this is a really great time to start practicing your duck identification, especially for the diving ducks on this list, because wintertime brings them all sort of together where the ice isn't in. You can have them in much closer areas, which is really nice for learning, and you can often get closer looks. At this time of year as well, males and females are already often paired up or floating around together, and so you can get a good look at what females look like, which, as we'll take a peek at later, can be quite difficult. So let's start with the loons, and as I said, there's only one species of loon that breeds in Newfoundland. It's the common loon. Probably many of you are familiar with this bird, especially if you have a cabin on a lake or go past some ponds nearby in the summer. And so as you can see, it's very much a water bird. It superficially looks like a duck because it's floating on the water, has a big bulky body and a smaller head. But if we take a closer look at the beak or the bill, you'll see that it's really sharp and pointed. And that's very different from what we expect from like your typical duck bill, right? So that makes us know that this is a loon. You'll also notice it has a really bright red eye. And the common loon is all black and white, but it has this very distinct checkered pattern on its back and wings when they're folded up, as well as a fully black head and those white neck stripes that are really distinctive for them. You can see the picture on the bottom is really cute. Common loons, as well as a lot of duck species, they will let their young ride on their backs before they are able to thermoregulate. So when they're still downy and they haven't gotten the ability to keep themselves warm yet, they'll hop up on their parents' backs and hide under their wings to stay warm. So if you're lucky, you'll see that out in the summer when the chicks are growing larger. So that's the only loon we have, and its call is quite distinctive as well. Though I don't have, I should have a little sample of it, but you can look up what they sound like if you have never heard them before. Okay, so we're done with the loons already. Let's move on to ducks. So here's a picture of a mallard, and it just sort of to show that most people are pretty familiar with ducks as a concept. They're quite a large bird with a stocky body. They have a broad, flat bill, a duck bill. They typically have a thin neck and a small head compared to the size of their body. And then if they're on land, you can see their feet quite easily. They have large webbed feet, good for swimming, of course, and they are associated with water, but sometimes you can find them walking on land as well. So let's get into, before we get into our species, I forgot I wanted to mention this resource, which is called Ducks at a Distance. I'll send a link to this. It's a short little booklet identification guide that was created by the Department of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And it's actually for hunters, but it's really good. And it has a lot of ducks in flight. It shows you flocking and flying behaviors, and it gives you a close-up look of the wing, which often has a very distinct color patch called the speculum, which is really good for identifying species. So I'll be showing the wing sections on most of the slides here for us to see, but I'll in a follow-up email, I'll send out a link to access the whole guide of this, which is really fun to look at. And so on the slides today, I'm also going to be showing you both males and females in their breeding plumage. But an interesting thing about ducks is that in the late summer, they go through a molt of their feathers where they molt all of their flight feathers at the same time, which means they can't fly, and they're quite in danger of predation at that time. So they go through what's called an eclipse plumage. And if we think about the word eclipse, it means like to cover up or to cover up, I guess, is one meaning. And so it's like the birds are trying to cover themselves up and camouflage themselves. And so males, even though we have this mallard picture of these mallards, on the top is the male, and he's bright and brilliant, of course, in the breeding season. But during eclipse plumage, he'll actually lose that really brilliant coloration so that he can hide more easily while he's molting all his flight feathers. And then he'll turn into what you see on the bottom, where he looks much more like a female with that cryptic brown coloration. So males do molt their body feathers 2 times a year. So they do one in the late summer, and they do one in the early spring. But I'll be showing you pictures of breeding plumage. Okay, so when we talk about ducks, and if you look in your identification guide or an online ID resource, you'll notice that ducks are split up into 2 sections, the dabbling ducks and the diving ducks. We went into this a little bit in the bird ID for beginners, our first session, but we'll go into it more now. And so when you first see a duck, you'll be able to tell which section of the guide to look in, because you'll be able to tell if it's a dabbling duck or diving duck by how it's feeding, or if it's on land or in water. So you can use several different identification points to tell these 2 apart. So when they're feeding, you'll see that dabbling ducks are feeding at the surface. They're tipping their tails up in the air, and they're getting things that are just underneath the water surface, like plants, etc. Whereas diving ducks are feeding underwater, so they're diving completely under. You also will be able to tell which one it is based on where their legs are on the body. So dabbling ducks' legs are centered on their body, which means they're able to balance properly and walk on land. Whereas diving ducks' legs are farther back on the body, so they don't have very good balance when they're walking, and so they're often, they're very infrequently found on land, and they're mostly found in the water. They also, dabbling ducks have large wings for their body size, which means that when they want to start flying, they can take vertically off. They don't have to have a running start, and they can also take off from land. Diving ducks have small wings for their body size, which means that they need a bit of a runway to take off from the water, and they can't take off from land. And they have very quick wing beats and fly quite quickly. But if you see a duck sort of running along the top of the water before taking off, it's a diving duck. And if you see one springing right off of the surface of the water or off of land, then it's a dabbling species. And then the last one is a little bit subjective, so maybe not quite as helpful, but dabbling ducks tend to sit more high upon the water, so they're a bit more buoyant looking, whereas diving ducks are a little bit lower in the water and a little more covered up. So let's focus in on dabbling ducks to start with. We have several species here. I don't have their names because we're about to go through very specifics of each one of them. And so as we said in the last slide, the dabbling ducks, you'll find them feeding at the surface of the water. Their feet are in the middle of the body so they can walk on land. They're springing out of the water to fly or off of land, and they can sit more high upon the water. They're often found in shallower bodies of water, like small ponds and marshes, because that's where they can reach the plants or insects that they're eating from the bottom of the water or that are growing up from the bottom of the water. The first duck that we'll talk about today is the wood duck. The wood duck, so the males are the main picture and the females are the smaller bottom picture. That's typically how I have the slides laid out. So the wood duck, as you can see, the male is a really strikingly colored bird. So as you can see, he has like a bright red eye ring. He has a bright orange beak. And he has these really distinct white patches of color all along the body, along the chin, on sort of the shoulder, on the edge of the wing. And it's all very, very striking. There's not really anything else that we can mistake a male wood duck for. The hen or the female down at the bottom is sort of a mottled brown, which is what you'll find for most ducks. But she's actually quite distinct with this really, really distinct white teardrop around the eye, as well as the white edges on her wings that you can see poking out near the back. If we look to the wings, the picture of the wings on the left of the slide, you can see that the speculum, which is the colored section, is dark blue and it's bordered with a thin stripe of white on the bottom. And you can see the thin stripe of white on both of the pictures of the ducks there. Wood ducks are really interesting because they actually nest in cavities in trees. So they don't nest near the water's edge on the ground. And you can actually see them sitting in trees sometimes, which is so ridiculous because they look so silly up there with their webbed feet. But that's how they have their name. And the habitat they use for nesting is standing water surrounding trees. So it's often sort of a wooded swamp or something like that. They're not super common in Newfoundland. And there's only a couple of breeding records from the island, some down in the Codroy Valley in the southwest of the island. And we've had a successful brood in Deer Lake a couple of years ago as well. The next species is the mallard. This one is pretty familiar to a lot of people, though not quite as common as other parts of North America. The mallard will sometimes stay in the winter when there's open water, and it nests on the ground near ponds or in wetlands, even within towns and cities, which is why it's such a familiar species to a lot of people, because you can see it even if you're just in the park in town, that sort of thing. So this is a dabbling duck again. The mallard, the male, is the top two pictures there. And as you can see, he has a really brilliant green head. It's iridescent, so sort of shines with different colors in the sun. He has a bright yellow bill, which is, your very typical duck colored bill, what people imagine when they think of a duck. And if you look down at the tail of the male, you'll see that he has these two big curly black feathers down there. And that's a distinct mark for this species. So only the mallard males will have those curly tail feathers in Newfoundland. If we look down to the bottom, you can see the female there. She's a mottled brown, and her bill is not the bright orange. It's actually orange and brown. But otherwise, she's pretty undistinct. But if you look at the speculum or the wing pictures with the bright color, the speculum is a blue and it's bordered with white on the top and the bottom in both the male and the female. And that's an important thing to look at to tell them apart, especially the females, from our next species, which is the American black duck. So this is the American black duck. And we have both the male and the female in this picture. The male is on the top right and the female is in the front. And this is actually probably the most common duck in Newfoundland. They breed all across Eastern Canada, but they're actually a species at risk in a lot of the other places. And they are quite uncommon compared to the mallard in a lot of other provinces and areas. They also nest on the ground near ponds and wetlands, and they're comfortable being in towns and cities. So you can see these in St. John's or other cities and towns across the island. And as you can see, the males and females are a little bit more difficult to tell apart because they're both this dark brown with just a little bit of markings on the face. But if you take a look at the color of the bill, you'll be able to tell the males and females apart. So the bill of the male is olive yellow, and the bill of the female is a dark olive color. So the male's is much lighter yellow color. If we look at their wings, this is where I was saying to take note compared to the mallards. They also have a blue speculum, but it's bordered with black. It doesn't have white on the top or the bottom of it. So that's a good identification point between black ducks and mallards, if you can get a look at that color on the wing. I'll note that mallards and American black ducks can often hybridize. So you'll have one of each species mate, and so the offspring are often a hybrid of the two species. And so you can have ducks that have visual cues of both of these species, which can be sometimes confusing, but it is pretty common. And so you would just say that it's a black duck mallard hybrid. The other duck species also do hybridize, but this one is particularly common. Oh, and I have another picture here of the speculum showing with that black border with no white, so you can see that it's definitely a black duck instead of a mallard. Our next species is another dabbling duck, the gadwall. The gadwall mostly breeds in Western North America in the prairies and grasslands. And it is rare in Newfoundland, but we do have some records of it breeding in the Codroy Valley, again in the southwest corner of the island. And they also nest on the ground near water. Since they're a dabbling duck, they dabble for aquatic plants and invertebrates. So you can see them when they're tipping their tails up as well. There's a few pictures here, the one on the top and on the left, they're both the males. So they're gray overall. They're pretty striking though, and they have some cool pattern. And if you look to the tail, you'll see that the male has a really extensive section of black feathering down by his tail. And if you also look at his bill, you'll note that it's a dark colored, it's a black bill. And so that's a good thing to notice when you're trying to tell some species apart. When you take a look at the female down at the bottom, again, you have mottled brown, pretty typical for a female. But if you look at her bill, it's orange on the edge of a dark bill. And then if you look at her face, you'll see that she has a little bit of a dark smudge around the eye. And so those are really sometimes difficult to tell, especially if you have a duck at a distance or if the lighting is not great, but something to look out for if you have the opportunity. If you look at the wings in the middle here, you can see that the speculum patch on both of the sexes is white. And on the male, it also has sort of a chestnut section as well. This is a pretty cool duck that we have next, the northern pintail. They breed all across Canada into the Arctic. And they've been found breeding in several locations in the past in Newfoundland, including Western and Northern Newfoundland. They also nest on the ground in sparse grassy vegetation in open areas, so they're not really a forested species. And sometimes they go when the young have hatched, they'll move the whole family really quite far distances to different sections of water where there's optimal feeding. Oops, there we go. And so when we look at the male here up at the top, you can see he's quite distinct. He's got this really slender, long neck with the white throat that has a spike up into the back of the head. And his head is this really deep brown. You'll also see this very distinct long pointed tail. Pintail is his name, so it makes sense. And the rest of his body is gray. If you look at the female down at the bottom, she's the one standing on snow. Again, we have a mottled brown duck, but if you look at the neck, it's like very, very long and slender compared to those other ones we've seen so far. And her face is plain. She doesn't really have many markings or anything of note on the face. For the speculum of the pintails, for the male, it's green, and for the female, it's sort of a bronzy brown. Okay, here is the American widgeon. The American widgeon, it breeds near shallow lakes and marshes and eats submerged vegetation like a lot of the other dabblers. And we have records in Newfoundland only from the southwest. So it's not very common around the entire island in the summer. If you look at the male up at the top there, he has a small blue-gray bill. That's pretty distinct for this species with that black tip. You'll see that he has a brilliant green streak behind the eye, as well as a distinct white cap on his forehead, or his forehead is sort of that pale cream color. The female down at the bottom is again sort of a brown mottled duck, but the head is gray compared to the body. It's quite a distinct color difference. And also, if you look at the eye, you'll see that she has a really dark smudge around the eye, almost like she's wearing like some old eye makeup or something. And that's a little bit easier to see when you're out in the field to tell the widgeons apart. But the bill color is a really good one for widgeons, especially for females who aren't as distinct as the male. If you look at the speculum colors of the wing, you'll see that it's green in both the male and the female, and the male also has a big white patch above the green section, and you can see him in flight here at the bottom as well. In Newfoundland, in the wintertime, we also sometimes get Eurasian widgeons, and these are widgeons, but a different species from Europe. And so it looks like this. It's a bit of a blurry picture. But they look different because they have a different color, especially on the head. So it's rufous brown instead of this gray color. And the forehead patch is also buffier, or like has more of a brownish, pinkish tinge rather than the pale cream color that the American widgeon has. But the Eurasian widgeon is typically only around in the winter, not in the summer. Here's our next dabbling duck. So this is the northern shoveler. And you probably noticed the first thing that you'll see on this bird is its gigantic shovel-shaped bill. And that's on both the male and the female. And it's really distinctive. There's no other species here that's going to have a beak like that. So if you see a big shovel bill, it's a northern shoveler. They typically breed just in Western North America, but there have been some successful broods in the Codroy Valley, again in Newfoundland, as well as in Deer Lake. And they nest on the ground in grassy areas, sometimes quite far from water. And then they would move their chicks to water as well once they've hatched. So we have the male up here on the top. He's got quite bold colors. So he has a really dark iridescent green head. He has that big spatulate black bill. And he's otherwise white underneath, dark on the back, but he has that really rusty brown patch on his sides that stands out quite well in comparison to the white at the front and back. On the bottom, we have the female or the hen. And again, we have mottled brown, pretty typical, but just take a look again at that bill and you'll know that it's a northern shoveler because it's around twice as big as any other duck's bill. When we look at the speculum on the wing, you can see that it is green for both the males and the females, and the male also has a powdery blue section above at the front of the wing, which you can see much better when he's flying in that picture down on the bottom. Here we have the blue-winged teal. So all of the ducks so far that we've talked about are pretty sizable ducks. They're all around the same size as the ones that probably people know best, which is the black duck and the mallard. Where we have here the blue-winged teal, and we'll have another species of teal on the next slide, and they are much, much smaller. If you see them together with the other species, you'll think that it's like half the size, where you might be like, oh, that's a cute baby duck, except for it's not a baby, it's actually just a different species. So the teals are much smaller. So this is the blue-winged teal, and it nests in wetlands as well as shallow marshes and temporary ponds. So they actually move their breeding locations around each year depending on where there's water. So they're not typically going to, these ponds that are there year to year. In Newfoundland, we've had them breeding in the southwest area of the island, as well as on the Avalon. When we take a look at identifying them, you'll see that the male here on the top is pretty dark overall, but you'll notice that he has this really distinct brilliant white crescent on the front of his face, just behind the bill and before the eye. And that's really distinct for them. The female down on the bottom, again, we have mottled brown. If you look really closely, you'll see that she has a dark eye line going straight through the eye from the front to the back. You'll see she has white arcs up above and below her eye, and you'll see a really pale base of the bill, which we can compare on the next slide to the green-winged teal female. Again, those are marks that are probably difficult to tell without a lot of practice, but this time of year, it's nice because males and females are paired up together. The speculum of these, the blue-winged teal is green for males, and then the female doesn't really have a lot of color down the bottom of the wing, but they both have a powdery blue patch up at the top of the wing, which you could see in the male in flight there as well. Okay, here's our other teal species, the green-winged teal. I've seen them more often than the blue-winged teal in Newfoundland when I've been out and about. Again, they're really a tiny duck. They're about half the size of a mallard or a American black duck. And they breed in shallow, permanent ponds that have a lot of vegetation growing up above the water. And they like areas that are near forests rather than in open areas. So you might find them in, a pond in the middle of the woods kind of thing. You'll see often green-winged teal sticking around in the winter. You might have them mixed up in your flocks of ducks that are around the edges of the ponds. And they feed on seeds that are picked off of the surface of the water or off the mud, as well as in little invertebrates in the water and tadpoles. If we take a look at the pictures here, you can see the male is up at the top again. He has a chestnut colored head and he has a dark green stripe going behind the eye. And if we look down to his shoulder, you'll see that he has a very distinct white spur that's on his side. And the rest of him is sort of a dark gray with some white and black around the tail. The female down at the bottom is a mottled brown again. She has a dark cap. So the brown on the top of her head is darker than the brown on the rest of her, as well as a darker eye line, that line that goes straight through the eye from the back to front. And if you remember from the blue-winged teal that was on the page before, it had some white marks above and below the eye and a really pale base of the bill, but the green-winged teal female doesn't really have any of that. It's pretty consistent color among the rest of her face. The really nice mark for the green-winged teal, especially the female, is the green section of the wing. So the speculum is very brilliant and often pokes out really nicely in the females while they're floating around. And so if you have a really tiny dabbling duck with a green section sticking out of the wing, you have a green-winged teal. And you can also see the black border in the speculum in that in-flight picture of the male. So we had a couple of ducks that had green heads. So we'll just do a quick comparison here. So we had the mallard as well as the northern shoveler, whose heads are entirely green. So to compare, we have the mallard on the left there. If you take a look at the bill colors of both of these birds, the bill of the mallard is yellow, bright yellow, and the bill of the shoveler is black, and it's gigantic. So those are very distinctly different, even though they have green heads. And if we look at the color of the body, you'll see that the mallard has sort of a grayish brown body and chestnut on its chest. And you'll see that the shoveler has a bright white body with chestnut on its sides. So those are some points of comparison. And again, the mallard has the curly tail feathers. We also had 2 ducks with green eye stripes. That was the American widgeon and the green winged teal. And so we'll just compare these two quickly beside each other. So the American widgeon, again, had that white forehead, whereas the green winged teal just is brown on top, like the rest of the face color. And then if we take a look at the bill, we can see they're very different. The American widgeon has that little blue-gray bill with the black tip, and the green winged teal has a fully black bill, and it's much larger. And that is the end of the dabbling ducks. So we'll move on now to the diving ducks. So again, a little recap, you'll be able to tell the diving ducks apart because as implied by that name, they dive for their food. So they aren't tipping their tails up above the water, they are fully submerging themselves. And they're typically underwater for around 10 to 30 seconds, but they can stay underwater for more than a minute because they have some very distinct traits that they've evolved with, like a high tolerance for asphyxia, which is a lack of air. And so basically they ration the oxygen that they've taken in to only be used in vital tissues and organs while they're diving. They also reduce their heart rate while they're diving. And those responses are prompted when water hits a special receptor in their nostrils. So that's how they can spend so much time diving underwater. And when they're finished diving and they're underwater, all they have to do is stop paddling their feet and they just pop back up like a cork. So typically our diving ducks are hunting for either sedentary prey, things that don't move like clams that are on the bottom, and so then they'll dive down and pop up in the exact same spot. Or we have species that are hunting for mobile prey, which is moving around like fish, and so they'll dive down and they'll pop up in a totally new location. So a couple of our traits, again, is that they have their feet far back on their body, which is really good for propelling themselves underwater while they're swimming, but really bad for walking. So we typically aren't finding these species on land. They have small wings for their body size, so they're needing a little bit of a runway when they're taking off from water, and they can't take off from land. And they fly very quickly with quick wing beats, and they sit a bit lower in the water. But again, those are a little bit harder to tell. So we'll go through all of these species here now one by one. So the first one we have is the ring-necked duck. You might think it's a bit of a weird name looking at these pictures because there's not really a ring around their neck that you can see very well. But if you look at the picture, the small little inset one on the top left, you can see a bit of a brown ring around the neck. And so that's the ring that they're named for. A lot of species were named back when they were named was because they were collected. So somebody would shoot them and take them for a really close look. And so you'd be able to see the ring if you have them in your hand. But of course, it's difficult to see that ring if they're floating around in a pond. So I think they should be called the ring-billed duck because as you can see, if you look at the bill, they have a dark bill that's tipped with a very distinct white ring around the front. And both the male and the female have that pale ring around their bill. Ring-necked ducks nest in shallow marshes or in small ponds with forested edges. So you'll find them ponds in the forest. And they have a really cool way of constructing their nests where they actually do it over water with floating vegetation. So they need to maintain their nest throughout the breeding season if water levels change. as time goes on. And I can just imagine like this nest floating around. It seems pretty tenuous, but ringneck ducks are found all across the island of Newfoundland, and they're probably one of the more common diving ducks that we see during the breeding season. So we'll go back again here to identifying them. You can see that the male here on the top is pretty much totally black and white duck, which is the case for a lot of the diving ducks. So a couple of key things for them is that they have a black back and white sides. So the black back is really important. And he also has a bright yellow eye. The female is a dark brown with a white eye ring, and at the base of the bill, she has a paler section, which is also important to tell those species apart. When we have the speculum pictures of the diving ducks, they're not quite as helpful as the dabbling ducks because they're not really as brilliantly colored usually, but sometimes they do have little differences. Okay, here we have another species. This is the lesser scaup. Again, you can see the male is pretty much black and white, but take a look at the back. Remember how the ringneck duck had a black back? The lesser scaup has a gray back. So that's an important distinction. And again, we have a bright yellow eye, but you'll note that the bill doesn't have that ring around it. It's sort of all over gray or dark gray. The female down at the bottom is dark brown again, and she has a really bold white patch at the base of the bill. So it's not just a lighter brown, it's like fully white patch. If you take a look at the speculums, there's not really too much to note. They have a little bit of white in the inner feathers. We don't actually have any records of lesser scaup breeding in Newfoundland so far, but there is some potential for that because we see them around. If you were to find them nesting, they would nest on the ground close to deep permanent wetlands, so not water that would disappear throughout the summer. And they would like wetlands with a lot of vegetation emerging from the water because it has a lot of insects to eat. And the lesser scaup feeds on clams and plants, so it dives down for those. Okay, remember what this bird looks like because we're going on to the greater scaup on the next slide, and it looks nearly identical. So this is the greater scaup. It's far more common in Newfoundland, and it does actually breed on the island in the southern Avalon, as well as the Burin Peninsula and the West Coast. So we're much more likely to see the greater scaup than the lesser scaup, which is good to know because they look so similar. These birds typically nest in long grasses on the edge of freshwater ponds and things like that. And they're feeding on aquatic plants and animals as well. So we have the male here up at the top. Again, we have a pretty much black and white duck with a gray bill, a yellow eye, but we have a gray back rather than a black back, which was on the ringneck duck. And that brilliant white sides. The female on the bottom is dark brown again. And again, she has a really bold white patch at the base of the bill and is quite a bit larger than the lesser scaup, but that is probably quite difficult to tell, especially if you have it at a distance. If you take a look at the speculum, you'll see again, there's some white in the inner feathers there, but it'd be quite difficult to tell those apart. So I'll just compare now, since you're probably wondering how on earth you're supposed to tell the two species apart, the greater and lesser scaup, and that is something that is also very difficult even when you have them close at hand. So a lot of the time, you'll probably end up saying, I just saw a scaup, rather than being able to tell the difference, unless you've had a lot of practice. Because the only way to tell, as far as I know, if anyone else has any points, please do tell me. The only way to tell is sort of the shape of the head, and it's really difficult to see. So the lesser scaup has the highest peak of feathers at the back of the head. So you can see it sort of slopes up and the highest peak is up at the back. The greater scaup, the highest peak is at the front near the forehead. So it slopes up gradually and is at the highest at the forehead. Again, that's a very, very difficult thing to tell. and you really need a lot of practice and a lot of individuals mixed up together to be able to try and parse those out. So often you'll just say, I saw a scaup, but most of the time it'll be a greater scaup because that's what is more likely in Newfoundland. Here's our next diving duck, the common eider. And this is quite a bit larger than the others. It's a really heavy, stocky duck. And it's also quite distinct looking, as you could see, especially if you take a look at the shape of its bill. So it has a really sloped forehead. It doesn't have like a distinct head that goes out sideways into a bill. It sort of all slopes together. And because of that and the color of the yellow bill, it looks really prominent because the color of the bill almost goes up to the eye on the male. So you can see the rest of the color is black and white. And he has a fully white back that extends all the way down into the wing. The female is here on the bottom left. She's overall brown, but again, they're quite a bit larger than all the other ducks. And so you'll be able to tell that, as well as the shape of that bill again. She has the same shape of the bill as the male does, so it just slopes from the forehead all the way down to the tip of the bill, rather than having a distinct sort of rounded head with a bill coming out of it. Eiders are also found really just in coastal areas, so they're not going to be inland on ponds. They breed out on coastal islands. So these are only going to be found around the coast of Newfoundland, and a lot of them are on the west coast or the northern edge of the island. Common eiders are also where, fun fact, eider down comforters come from their feathers, which is why they're called eider down comforters. So when females are nesting, they'll actually pluck the downy feathers out of their breast to line the nest to keep the eggs warm. And so in areas, especially like in Iceland, there will be actually eider farms where farmers will collect that down once nesting season is done and use it for creating these eider down things that we use. There's also another species of eider called the king eider that you can see in winter, and they're quite a bit different, have a very different looking face, and I should have put a picture of them on here too. I apologize, I didn't. But they have a very colorful looking head in comparison to the common eider. But we don't really see them in the breeding season. Okay, here's our next diving duck. This is the harlequin duck. This is a small duck and not often seen during breeding season because they are mostly only known to be in the Northern Peninsula, and they're really often in remote areas where they're using fast-moving rivers, inland rivers, of course they're inland, rivers to nest on. And so these are like those really rocky, fast-moving, really bubbly rivers where often people aren't going because it's hard to access. And so you often don't get to see harlequin ducks during the summer. But you often see them, or you can see them in certain areas during the winter in coastal areas, especially down on the south coast. So the harlequin duck, as you can see, the male here is a very distinct looking duck. It has some similarities to the wood duck that we saw at the very beginning because of this really striking white patterning on a dark body. But again, you can tell the difference by their behavior of which one's diving and which one's dabbling, and they do look different in color. But the harlequin duck here, as you can see, he's sort of dark slate gray all over with these white patches, very distinct patches dotted around the body, and this really bright rusty flank. And you'll also notice that it has really tiny little stubby bill as well. The female, which is down at the bottom, is brown all over. And for the female diving ducks, it's really important to note where the pale patches are on the face, or the white patches. And so she has a round white patch behind the eye, as well as a pale face from the eye to the bill. So sort of a two-tone face with a spot behind the eye. You'll notice also when they're flying that they have this bright white speculum and sort of a sharp tail. So these are really cool to see if you ever get the chance. Our next one looks vastly different, the long-tailed duck. And this duck has a circumpolar distribution, so it's all around the pole or the North Pole, or the northern pole, not the North Pole. And it is pretty rare in Newfoundland, but it's a regular breeder in the Long Range Mountains, so on the northwest coast of Newfoundland. And most people are actually familiar with the winter plumage, which is down here on the right, because we do often see them more in winter time. And so you typically see them in this winter plumage, but actually their breeding plumage is this really funny, really funny one up here on the top left. So the males up there, they have a really long tail, thankfully, since they're called the long-tailed duck, in both the winter and the summer. And you can see the male is dark brown all over, but he has a big white face patch. He looks a little like a clown with his, with all of his patterning. And he has this really kind of silly white patch of feathers on top of the head. The female is down here on the bottom left, and she's brown, but she also has a pale face patch that's quite large and goes all the way from the bill to the back of the head. Okay. So next we have two different species of scoters, and this is the surf scoter. They're also a duck, a diving duck. And you can see these a lot of the time in the winter on the coast of Newfoundland, out in the ocean, in big rafts of them, like huge numbers of them. And the important thing to see for the surf scoter is the fully black plumage for the male, other than these two distinct white patches, one on the back of the neck and one on the forehead. He's got a white eye, and then he has this really big knobby bill, and it slopes up to the forehead, almost like the eider that we saw earlier. But you can see the color is much different because he's fully black. The female down in the bottom here is brown. Again, and she has, again, if we're looking for the white on the females, she has the white oval patch behind the eye, as well as a vertical white patch behind the bill, rather than a big face patch. And then down here at the picture, or the bottom, you can see 3 males and 1 female. And you can see they're kind of far away and a bit difficult to see, but you can distinctly see that big bill with the orange color and the white forehead. So the surf scoter is around, as I mentioned, in the winter a lot along the coastline, and we don't have any records of them breeding on the island, but it is possible, again, because they are seen around in the area. And if they were to be found breeding, they would be nesting in wooded areas near shallow freshwater, like a pond, a bog, or tundra areas. Here's another species of scoter, the black scoter. And again, we have, for the male is the one that's all black, except for this bright orange or yellow orange knob on the top of the bill. And the females are the brown ones in here. And so you can see the shape of the bill is a little bit different from the surf scoter that we just looked at, but that bright orange bill is really distinct, or that bright orange top of the bill is really distinct. The females are all dark brown, except for the bottom of the face and down into the neck a little bit is a paler section. So they have this brown dark cap and a paler section of the cheek. So black scoters haven't been found breeding in Newfoundland very often, but just in the last few years, we've had a few records of them come in from the Long Range Mountains, which is really cool, and one in Grossmore National Park up there as well. So I imagine there's probably more scoters around, but they're often in sort of inland, not very populated areas, that are difficult to get to, and they nest in large clumps of grass around small ponds and that sort of thing up in the highlands. Um, they are typically eating things like small fish and plants as well as crustaceans. And so again, they're diving ducks, so they're diving down to the bottom for those things. Moving on from the scoters, we now have the common goldeneye. And you'll see again, this is quite a trend for the diving ducks. They're mostly black and white. So it's important to just note the locations of the black and the locations of the white, as well as body proportions. And so the common goldeneye, we can see here, the male on the top is black and white, but he has a really big round white patch behind the eye, or behind the bill in front of the eye. You'll also notice that he has a short triangular bill and it's dark, and he has a bright yellow eye. He has a black back as well, and the white on his chest and belly sort of extends up into the wings in these kind of streams of a black and white pattern along the back. The female here at the bottom is again mostly brown, or well, sort of brownish, but she has a bit of a grayer body, and the head is distinctly different color, which is brown compared to the body. And again, she has a dark, mostly black bill. Common goldeneyes actually nest in cavities, so they aren't nesting on the ground. They're again nesting in holes in trees. And it's really cool when the females are searching for a nesting area. They'll just fly constantly around ponds, looking at the trees along the edge, and their wings whistle while they're flying, so you can hear them go by quite distinctly. And they actually go to the same cavity year after year, so they're using things like old woodpecker holes. They'll also use nest boxes that are human-made or other natural tree cavities. And they're typically nesting near deep lakes or ponds where there's a lot of invertebrates or bugs to eat in the water. So we have another really really similar looking species here, and I'll compare them afterwards. This is the Barrow's goldeneye. So again, we have a black and white diving duck with a bright yellow eye. But let's take a look at where the white patches are again. So we have black along the back of the male, we have a black head, and we have a big white patch in front of the eye, but instead of being a huge circle, it's sort of a crescent shape. That's important. Important to note. And we have, again, a tiny little black bill, triangular bill, bright yellow eye. And then if we take a look at the shoulder section, the black extends down into the shoulder in a little spur. And then you also have these white windows along the back instead of where I'll compare on the next page, but instead of in the common goldeneye, the white extended far higher up. The female looks quite similar to the other common goldeneye female, with a kind of gray-brown body and a brown head, which is a different color than the body, and her bill is mostly yellow. Those two are kind of difficult to tell apart. Barrow's goldeneye is often found mixed in with common goldeneye in groups in the winter, but we don't know of any breeding locations for them in the summer, but it is probably likely, especially in the long-range mountains, since they are around so frequently. And they'll nest in similar places in wooded or open country near a lake or pond surrounded by dense vegetation. And they're typically using a natural tree cavity for their nest, or an abandoned woodpecker hole again. And sometimes they'll also even use a little hole in a stream bank or a rock cavity. Okay, so let's do a comparison of the common goldeneye and Barrow's goldeneye here, since they look so incredibly similar. We have the males up at the top. Let's just notice again the locations of the white and how it looks. So the common goldeneye has a big round face patch, circular, and the Barrow's goldeneye has a crescent-shaped face patch that goes up into the forehead. If we look at the side by the wings, you'll see the common goldeneye has more white and it only has little black stripes going through. The Barrow's goldeneye is mostly black and it has white spots going through. It also has the black of the wing going down in a spur into the shoulder, down towards the breast, whereas the common goldeneye has all white. It's all white along the front here. So the males are quite easy to tell apart if you can get a good look at them. Females on the bottom here are much more difficult, and I don't know if I'd be able to tell them apart without their males nearby. But the female Barrow's goldeneye has a bit of a smaller, much smaller bill that's yellow colored, while the common goldeneye has a dark bill. Oh, and here we also have them flying. So there is a little bit of difference in the speculum color. So the Barrow's goldeneye is there on the left, and you can see the white in the inner wing is not very, it has a little black stripe before the next patch of white, and the common goldeneye is white, extends all the way from the back of the wing to the front. I think that'd be probably difficult to tell unless you saw them in flight quite well, but just something to note. Okay, here's a super cool looking duck, the hooded merganser. So our next three, I think, species are mergansers. Again, they are types of ducks. They're diving ducks, and mergansers are distinct from the other species of ducks because they all have a really super thin bill, which is a diagnostic mark that they're a merganser and not another species. So mergansers are all feeding on fish, so they're diving underwater, swimming under, catching fish, and popping up in a different location. The hooded merganser the male is really distinct with this big hooded feathers that he has on the back of his head, with a big white patch. Unfortunately, we don't have any breeding records for Newfoundland, but groups of hooded merganser males have been seen during the summer, so it's possible that they're somewhere. And the females are sitting on a nest and the males are out, and we haven't found where the females are. So there is some potential for that. This is another species that nests in cavities, in tree cavities in forested wetlands. And so they would be a little bit difficult probably to come across. What else do we need to look at for this guy? He's pretty distinct, as I said. We have this bright yellow eye, we have a dark head and back, but we have this huge hood with the white patch, and then we have brown or chestnut sides. The female is down at the bottom here, and she is mostly brown, as usual, but she also has this crest on the back of her head, the sort of frosted tips. And so that would be distinct for telling her apart from another species of merganser. Oh yes, I should also note that the shape of the big hood on the male can look quite different depending how he's holding those feathers. So it's not the shape of his head inside, it's these feathers on top. And so you can see in the top left corner, he can have those feathers relaxed, and so his hood is not nearly so large, but he still has this big white patch back there where those feathers are folded over. Okay, we'll go on to the red-breasted merganser. So again, this is a merganser. So it's catching fish, diving duck, and it has this long, thin bill, which is typical for mergansers. This one is bright red. And the red-breasted merganser is quite a bit larger. This picture on top is a little misleading because it's on land, but you wouldn't typically see these on land because, again, they're quite awkward with the location of their legs for walking. The red-breasted merganser males have a big, shaggy hairdo up here, which looks pretty crazy. It's not really a great diagnostic marker for them because sometimes it's slicked down if it's wet, or they just have shorter feathers, and so you can't count on that. But if we look at the rest of their color, we can see that they're different from other birds because they have this dark iridescent green head. They have that bright red merganser bill, a very distinct neck, white band on their neck. They have a sort of reddish hue to the breast, which is where their name comes from, and then they're dark on the back and gray on the sides. The females here on the bottom, and she has a gray body and a brown head. And this is an important thing for the females is that the brown of the head sort of slowly diffuses into the color on the throat and chest here. So there isn't like a big line or anything like that, like you see in the male. So the red-breasted mergansers are found in Newfoundland, of course, and they will nest on the ground in marshes, so they're not using trees. They'll also use forested riverbanks and rocky or vegetated islands. And the female of the red-breasted merganser, as well as some other species, will actually lay her eggs in other species' nests. And other species will lay eggs in her nest, so it's just a bit of a mess of whose eggs are whose sometimes. I have here the speculum in the bottom corner again. The male has just a big patch of white, and the female has a bit of a reduced patch of white. So again, not super helpful, but sometimes good to know. I think this might be our last species for the night, the common merganser. So again, this is a merganser, a diving duck, but they have the long, thin bill that you can see on both the male and female here. It's red for the common merganser. The male's over there on the right. He's black and white mostly. He's pretty sleek looking, black all along the head and back, and white all along the belly and sides. You'll notice that he doesn't have any crest. He has a very smooth head. The female here on the left has a gray body and a brown head, but you'll notice the difference between the head color and the neck color is very distinct. There's a really sharp line between the color of the head and the color of the neck. In comparison to the red-breasted merganser female that we saw on the last page, where it was an even gradient that sort of slowly merged from one color to the other. And she also has this really a distinct white chin patch. So that's how you can tell those two female species apart. What else do we need to note about these guys here? Again, we have the wing here. It's not super helpful, mostly just a white patch. And here's just a super cute picture of a female carrying around a little baby. Again, they do this while the chicks have not yet gotten their thermoregulation abilities yet. Okay. Okay, so that was our last species, but let's just pause here for a second and talk about what to do if you have a duck when you don't have perfect lighting or a great picture, so you can't take a good look at where all the features are and tell all the different color browns apart. What are you supposed to do to tell your ducks apart? So again, first thing is dabbling versus diving duck. Another really good thing to look at is where's the white. So you might only get a duck in low light or far away, and you might not get all the colors, but you can usually see where the white section is. So here, for example, we have the green-winged teal. You probably won't be able to see all the colors here if it's in a darker area, but you'll be able to see this white patch on the shoulder. And the green-winged teal was the only one that had that, so you know that's what the species is. Here we have the northern shuffler. You might not be able to see all the colors very well, but you'll be able to see where the white is. Same thing with the widgeon. You'll see the white on the forehead and the little white patch near the back. So that's just something to keep in mind if you don't have like ideal situations for looking at ducks. Just take a look at where's the white and try and compare that to your field guide or another resource where you have a list of ducks. Okay. And we'll just pause here also for tips for identifying female ducks. So I'm sure you noticed that mostly all the female ducks are brown, or a mottled brown or a variation of a gray brown. And so it can be really difficult and overwhelming to be able to figure out what species a female duck is, especially if they're at some distance away and you can't get a great look at them. So it definitely takes a long time to learn them. And some of the things to pay attention to are the shape of the body, the shape of the head, the shape of the bill, especially when you have a male and a female together, so you can compare them because the shape is always going to be the same. It's just the colors are different. So take a look at the shape from the males. Take a look especially at the patterns on the head because sometimes it's a very faint difference in patterns, but they can be quite helpful, like the lack of marking or the smudgy darkness around the eye or a line through the eye. And then in the diving ducks, where the white patches are or the pale patches are. And again, we were talking about the speculum coloration, which can be really helpful for especially the dabbling ducks because they often have quite bright colored speculum. So if you could see them stretching their wings out or preening their wings, you might get a look at the color there and have a bit more clues of what species you have. Okay, so that's the end of the info for you, but now we're just gonna go into a little poll section. So we'll do a little quiz. As always, it's anonymous. You don't need to worry about getting a wrong answer. It's just to practice and test your knowledge. And so let me try and remember to put up the poll. Okay. Question 1. Ta-da. Okay. Okay, so this is the first species here, and if you could scroll down below the picture that popped up in the poll, you should be able to scroll down it to see the options of what species I've given as options here. Seeing a lot of people with answers. If you have any other guesses, feel free to put them in there. I'll just leave it open for around 10 more seconds. Okay, I'll close it up. And okay. Um, so you should be able to see everyone's answers now. So most people said common merganser. And yes, that is correct. This is a common merganser. We know that it's a merganser to start with, and we can eliminate the golden eye and the long-tailed duck because it has that really skinny, sharp red merganser bill. So it's either a common merganser or a red-breasted merganser. And we know that it's a common merganser because it's only black and white. The red-breasted merganser had the big hairdo, crazy hairdo that is sometimes there, but it also has a white band and a red or brown breast. So this is a common merganser. Very good. And let's try and move along to the next slide here. There we go. Okay, so here's our next bird. And again, you should be able to scroll down below the picture to your options. Leave this open for 10 more seconds or so. So if you have any more guesses, put them in. Okay, I'm going to close that up and share our results here. And so most of the people said green-winged teal. We have a few for American widgeon. Nobody said mallard or northern shoveler, which is great. And yes, it is a green-winged teal. Whoops. Okay, yeah, I changed that slide. That's good. Yes, it's a green-winged teal. So both the green-winged teal and the widgeon have that eye stripe, that green eye stripe that we talked about. The American widgeon, remember, has a pale sort of cream or white colored forehead. So that'd be the American widgeon. And the green-winged teal, you could see even his the green wing patch there, really nicely showing. Very good. Let's move along here to our next one. Okay. So who do we have here? This one's a little more tricky, maybe, with these black and white ducks. So I'll just leave it open for 10 more seconds or so. Okay. Oh, here's another person put their answer in. All right, I'll close this one up and share that. And so we have a little bit more variation in our answers here, but we still have the vast majority saying greater scaup, and it is a greater scaup. I'll just explain that a little bit since this one's a little more confusing, and I gave you only black ducks to as your options. So it's not fully black all along the body, which would eliminate the black scoter, which, if you remember, is fully black and it just has that really brilliant yellow-orange knob on top of the bill. So black scoter is out. The ringneck duck is quite similar. It just is black along the back instead of having that gray along the back. Barrow's goldeneye and greater scaup. The Barrow's goldeneye has a big white patch behind the bill in front of the eye. So both the Barrow's goldeneye and the common goldeneye have a big white patch. The Barrow's goldeneye patch goes right up in sort of a crescent shaped by the eye. And so that means that this is a greater scaup with the gray back, black and white otherwise, and well, we won't get into the lesser scaup versus greater scaup question. Okay. So let's move on to our next one. So here's our next bird. And here are your options. Which species is this? I gave you all the same options as the last one. I'll just leave it open for 10 or 15 more seconds. Although we have a lot of people already participated, so if any of the last few want to put their answer in. The highest participation yet, 93%. Okay, I'll close that up then and share that with you. So we had all the same options. Nobody answered greater scaup, which is great. We just had that on the last slide, so everyone knows exactly what it looks like. Black scoter, again, has a fully black body, so it wouldn't have those white sides, so we'll eliminate that one. The Barrow's goldeneye would have had a big white crescent right behind the bill. So this is a ringneck duck, as most folks said, and so it's all black and white, has black on the back instead of gray, and it doesn't have any white patches on the face. Again, remember, ringneck duck, you can't really see the ring on its neck, but it has a big white ring on its bill. Okay. Very nice. And I think we'll go into our final one here. And here are your options. The answers are zooming in. I'll close this one up in a few seconds because almost everybody has answered already, which is wonderful. Okay, I'll close this poll and share the results. And we have a consensus. This is definitely a mallard, which is absolutely correct. So shoveler also has a fully green head, but it's all black and white in the body. Red-breasted merganser. We don't have a merganser bill here, as everybody saw. And the wood duck has all of those very distinct white streaks along its dark body. So that's great. Looks like everybody is ready to know mallard when they see one. Perfect. And so there's our mallard. And then that brings us to the end of this evening. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat, or you can definitely unmute yourself and ask as well. And yeah, feel free to check out our social media or get in touch with us with any questions about getting involved with the Atlas or the Owl Survey. And it's been a pleasure to talk to you about ducks tonight. Hopefully you can get out and look at some in the wild.
Okay, thanks very much, Jenna. I'm reading the chat as it comes in, but it looks like pretty much all thank yous. I'm not seeing any questions yet. People are saying you gave a great presentation. You're very patient and kind, which is very true. Yeah, so unless anyone has any questions, what's next week's topic? Next week's topic, I believe, is shorebirds and game birds.
Yes.
So we'll be talking about the shorebirds we have here, and then our ptarmigans and our grouse. Okay, hang on a second. All right, so we have a question on scops. Do they travel in large groups on the water?
Yes, in the wintertime, you can definitely see humongous numbers of them all together on the water. Yeah, for sure. And they can also be mixed up with other species as well sometimes. But definitely. In the summertime, not so much, but in the winter, absolutely huge numbers of them.
We also have a question about the picture you have up here. So is the duck in the picture a teal or a widgeon?
It is a widgeon. So you can, it's a bit hard to tell because they're kind of far away, but you can see almost that like blue-gray bill with a black tip on the brightest one here, as well as that like dark smudgy eye. But all female ducks, there's female ducks here, so tricky.
And then we have another question here. What are the white ducks called?
I imagine that probably we're referring to domestic ducks. And so a lot of domestic duck species are like fully white, or you can sometimes have them mixed with mallards again, where you have like kind of mallard color with often like a really white breast that's often like a bit bigger or like bulkier than a regular wild duck. So that's probably what you're seeing, a domestic duck.
Yeah, or some kind of mix. If you go down to Kitty
Some
Bitty
kind of
Lake,
mix.
there are often some really interesting combinations with white in all kinds of unexpected places. So
Yes, absolutely.
Um, Susan Poulin asked, what is the difference between a grebe and a loon in the winter?
A grebe and a loon in the winter. That's a really good question, and I have not been thinking of grebes for a while.
No, the grebe is, I mean,
But the bill shape should definitely be different. The loon will definitely have a incredibly pointed, sharp
After this whole
bill.
presentation. Oh, is this where he spills all the cakes? Oh, God.
I'm just looking up a picture of a grebe so I can actually answer this more thoroughly.
and we have another question from Daniel. What's the trickiest distinction between ducks, or your trickiest distinction? I'm going to jump in there and say those scops, they get me every time. The greater and lesser scop is, I find that one very, very hard. I don't know if you have a
Yeah.
different,
It is very, very hard. The scops for sure. And honestly, the female ducks still catch me as well, especially when they're not really close by. And it's hard to see those features or get a look at the shape of the head and stuff like that. Those female ducks can absolutely trip me up.
female ducks in general, yes, also very tricky.
Yeah.
And I guess Carol did not find the quiz difficult enough because she says that we should quiz them on the female ducks. So that'll be next week's quiz for a challenge.
Yeah.
Question: when ducks are nesting in trees, are they easily disturbed?
That's a really good question. And I'm not really sure because I haven't come across any ducks in their nests in trees before. I just gonna guess that if a duck is in its cavity, it probably wouldn't be super concerned if someone's like walking by, or just like not hanging out and knocking on the tree or something silly like that. If a duck was standing on the tree, then it would probably fly away. If it was like standing on the tree branch, just looking around.
Seems reasonable to me. I've definitely had the experience a couple times of having common goldeneye females circling around a cabin that I was staying in, like repeatedly. And we did wonder if she had a nest nearby and was just disturbed by the fact that we were there at all. We never actually saw her go into a cavity despite many, many efforts. So,
yeah.
Claire asked if we've seen the sea eagle. I have not seen the Steller sea eagle. Jenna, have you seen the sea eagle?
Nor have I, sadly, though I hope to one day.
Unfortunately for us, when it's here in Newfoundland in the summer, we are usually out in the field doing surveys for the Atlas. So not free to go on boat trips to try and find the Steller sea eagle.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, he's back. He's back now. Interesting. Interesting.
Wow, early. I'll go back to the grebe question because I looked at grebes and I remember what they look like now. So loons, so the bill is different, as I mentioned, but the grebe bills are like really thin and almost needle-like. They're so skinny. They're still very sharp and pointed, but they're very needle-like, whereas the loon bill is like definitely thicker and fatter. But also the grebes just have like a really kind of ridiculously skinny neck, a really ridiculously long and skinny neck, which I think would look different than the loon, which has, I mean, it has a longer neck, but it's like definitely like stubbier or sort of closer to the body. This is maybe not very helpful.
No, I think you're making sense.
So that's what I would look for mostly. Yeah.
Okay, so the conclusion is no, the eagle is not back, but hopefully will be next summer. Indeed,
Yes.
We're hoping to be the first North American atlas that reports a breeding attempt by a Steller sea eagle, even if it is with a bald eagle. That's what we're going for. Okay. I don't think there are any more questions coming in. So I think we'll let you off the hook there, Jenna. But thank you very much for the presentation. Excellent job as always.
Yeah, and thanks everyone for coming out. Hopefully we'll see you next week.
See you next
Bye
week.
all.
Bye.